This is Robert Wadlow. At nearly 8 foot 12 inches, or 9 feet tall, the Guinness Book of World Records has declared Robert Wadlow as the tallest person to have ever lived. This fleshly protuberance belongs to Mehmet Öziyürek of Turkey. Mehmet has been confirmed by Guinness as having the world's longest recorded nose. His schnozzle measured 8.8 centimeters, or just over 3.5 inches when it was last measured on March 18, 2010. And this, of course, is Mount Everest. At 8,848 meters, or just over 29,000 feet, Everest is the world's tallest mountain. Mount Everest is so high it almost approaches the normal cruise height where most commercial aircraft fly. And that brings us to this woman, Vesna Vulovic. Vesna holds the official Guinness record for being the only human to survive the highest free fall to Earth without a parachute. It was a cold January day in 1972 when flight attendant Vesna Vulovic fell from a doomed Yugoslavian DC-9, eventually landing on a snowbank 34,000 feet below as the sole survivor of JAT Airlines Flight 367. The amazing true story of Vesna Vulovic and her battle for survival is next on Maximus.
You are watching Maximus Aviation.
Vesna Vulovic was born in Belgrade in the Republic of Serbia on January 3, 1950. Initially, it was young Vesna's love of the Beatles that led her from her home in Belgrade to the United Kingdom after her first year of college. Vesna also thought the move would help her improve her English skills. After a little while in London, Vesna and some friends decided it was time to take things up a notch, so they moved to the hip party town of Stockholm in Sweden. However, when she told her parents about her relocation, they were not happy. They told her young daughter to leave that den of sex and drugs in Stockholm and return back home to Belgrade at once. So she did. But soon after her return, Vesna figured out a way she could please her parents and still enjoy the freedom to travel and see the world. It was after seeing one of her friends in a flight attendant's uniform that she got the idea to become an air hostess. That way she could go to London or Stockholm whenever she wanted. So in 1971, 21-year-old Vesna Vulovic got a job with JAT, Yugoslavia's national airline. Vesna was barely into her first year working for the airline when she and fellow crew members arrived in Copenhagen on the morning of January 25, 1972, the day before they would take Flight 367 on its final 2 legs to Zagreb, Croatia, and then on to Belgrade, Serbia. Vesna wasn't scheduled to work on Flight 367, but JAT had confused her for another flight attendant also named Vesna. So at the last minute, she was assigned to Flight 367, replacing a flight attendant by the same name. Nevertheless, Vesna said she was excited to travel to Denmark because it was her first time. Besides, she said this was the reason she became a flight attendant in the first place. The crew had the entire afternoon and the following morning to themselves. Vesna was hoping to get some sightseeing in, but her fellow crew members insisted on going shopping. According to Vesna, this idea filled her with a feeling of foreboding of the events to come. Everybody wanted to buy something for their family, she recalled. So I skipped sightseeing and went shopping with them instead. According to the way Vesna put it, she felt like they seemed to know that something terrible was about to happen. They didn't actually talk about it, Vesna said, but from what I saw, I felt for them. She also recalled the captain didn't go out with the rest of the crew and he remained locked in his room for 24 hours. He didn't want to go out at all, she said. And in the morning during breakfast, all the co-pilot talked about was how much he missed his son and daughter. So Vesna seemed to have a real sixth sense about the upcoming flight. JAT Airlines Flight 367, a McDonnell Douglas DC-9, left Stockholm Arlanda Airport at 1:30 p.m. on January 26, 1972. The first leg of the flight landed at Copenhagen Airport at 2:30 p.m., where Vesna Vulovic and the rest of the crew would board the plane. However, the plane was late. We were all in the terminal and watched it pull up to the ramp. She said they watched the passengers and crew exit the plane. Vesna and several of her colleagues noticed a particularly irritated passenger leaving the plane. Perhaps it was due to its late arrival. In retrospect, it may have been due to something else, something far more ominous. The sight of this man was one of the last things Vesna would recall about the flight. At exactly 3:15 p.m. on January 26, 1972, JAT Flight 367 departed Copenhagen for Zagreb, Croatia. 45 minutes into the flight, the DC-10 entered Czechoslovakian airspace. The flight was uneventful and the plane was stable at cruise altitude and speed at 3:59 p.m. when the pilots received the weather forecast from the automated weather system. They are informed that the weather ahead is clear and calm. At 4:01 p.m. local time, while flying over Hemsdorf, Germany, the plane suddenly disappears from radar and all communication is lost. It would later be determined that at 4:01 p.m., an explosion tore through the front cargo area, causing the plane to break apart at an altitude of 33,330 feet. All 28 passengers and most of the crew were suddenly sucked out of the aircraft, where they fell from a height greater than that of Mount Everest to their deaths. So how did Vesna manage to survive when all others perished? Well, much like the rest of this incredible story, it was a series of miraculous events. At the moment of the blast, and since Vesna has no memory of the crash, experts surmised she was at the tail of the plane, which was torn apart from the rest of the fuselage. The theory is that one of the food carts pinned her to a wall, preventing her from being sucked out of the plane during the fall. The tail cone of the DC-9 stayed intact during the fall. That had two effects. The fall was slowed down below terminal velocity due to air friction, and the fuselage protected her body from the force of the impact. Also, when the tail cone impacted the snow-covered slopes of the mountain below, it impacted at such an angle that the brutal deceleration didn't happen all at once. Later investigators discovered, in addition to being trapped by the food cart and the slowing down of terminal velocity, there was yet another miraculous factor that played a major role in her survival. Vesna's physicians discovered that she had abnormally low blood pressure, and it was that low blood pressure that ultimately saved Vesna's life. Because the low blood pressure caused her to pass out quickly after the cabin depressurized and kept her heart from bursting on impact with the ground. Vesna later admitted she was aware of her low blood pressure before applying to become a flight attendant and knew that it would result in her failing her medical exam. But immediately prior to her exam, she said she drank excessive amounts of coffee beforehand and was able to pass the physical. After witnessing the crash, a local villager from what is now the Czech Republic, Bruno Henke, ran to the crash site, but all he saw when he arrived was pieces of the plane and dozens of bodies. But among those lifeless bodies, Bruno heard a female voice screaming in pain and found Vesna in her turquoise uniform covered in blood. According to Henke, Vesna was not at the tail but in the middle section of the plane right above the wings. Bruno, who had been a doctor for the German army during World War II, was key to saving Vesna's life since he was able to stabilize her until medical help arrived. Bruno said when he found her, she had the lower part of her body still inside the plane and her upper body hanging down out of the fuselage with the body of a fellow flight attendant lying on top of her. Vesna has always believed Henke's version. She always said he had no reason to lie to her and they remained good friends until his death. Also, Vesna said following JAT cabin protocol, she had to be right behind the last passenger. Since the DC-9 was half empty, she should have been in the middle section of the plane. Following the crash, she was immediately sent to a hospital in Prague, where she spent the following 27 days going in and out of a coma. Her pelvis was fractured and she broke several ribs. She had a fractured skull and 3 broken vertebrae, one of them totally crushed. She also had a brain hemorrhage and multiple fractures in both legs. Her injuries resulted in her being temporarily paralyzed below the waist. She had total amnesia from the hour preceding her fall until more than a month afterward. She first learned of the crash about 2 weeks after it occurred. Her parents told her that she fainted after being shown a newspaper headline by her doctor and had to be tranquilized. The last thing she could remember from before the crash was greeting passengers as they boarded. The next thing she remembered was seeing her parents in the hospital room 1 month later. She underwent treatment in a Prague hospital until March 12, 1972, after which she was flown to Belgrade. She was offered a sedative to help her sleep during the flight back to Yugoslavia but declined, explaining that she wasn't afraid of flying because she had no memory of the crash. Vesna's hospitalization lasted until June of 1972, after which she traveled to Montenegro to recuperate at a seaside resort where her doctors visited her every 2 or 3 days. Due to the broken vertebrae, Vesna was temporarily paralyzed from the waist down. She underwent several operations to restore her movement. Within 10 months of her fall, she had regained the ability to walk, but limped for the rest of her life, and her spine was left permanently damaged. In total, she spent 16 months recuperating. "Nobody ever expected me to live this long," she recounted in a 2008 interview. She attributed her recovery to her Serbian stubbornness. In September of 1972, Vesna said she wanted to go back to work as a flight attendant, but the airline felt that her presence on flights would attract too much publicity, so instead they gave her a desk job negotiating freight contracts. Sadly, Vesna's parents both died within a few years of her fall. In 1977, she married mechanical engineer Nikolai Breka after a year of dating, but sadly she was never able to have children. Then in 1985, the Guinness Book of World Records recognized her as the world record holder for surviving the highest fall without a parachute from 33,330 feet. She received the award from childhood idol Paul McCartney. 18 years after taking the desk job, Vesna retired from JAT Airlines. She also never considered herself lucky. "If I were lucky, I would have never had this accident, and my mother and father would still be alive," she said. The accident ruined their lives too. By the time she had reached her 60s, Vesna's health began to deteriorate. In December of 2016, her friends became concerned for her well-being after she abruptly stopped answering the telephone. On December 23rd, her body was discovered in her apartment. Her friends said that she had struggled with heart ailments in the years leading up to her death. She was buried in Belgrade's new cemetery on December 27, 2016. Even though there was evidence in the wreckage of a bomb, including fragments of an alarm clock used as a detonator, the official cause of the crash has been challenged by conspiracy theories over the years. In January of 2009, a German news magazine featured an investigative report by journalists Peter Hornung and Pavel Thiener. Allegedly based on newly obtained documents, they concluded that it was extremely likely that the plane had been mistakenly shot down only a few hundred meters above the ground by a MiG fighter of the Czechoslovakian Air Force, having been mistaken for an enemy aircraft while attempting a forced landing. However, the reporter Hornung himself stated that for his theory there are only indications but no evidence. Vesna herself referred to the claims that the plane attempted a forced landing or descended to such a low altitude as nebulous nonsense. However, the Czech magazine Technet quoted a Czech army expert that said it would not be possible to conceal such an incident because there will be approximately 150 to 200 people knowing about the incident. They would have no reason not to talk about the incident today. He further claims that for the JAT-MD-80, it was technically impossible to dive in a state of emergency from the proven flight level of 33,000 feet to the low altitude and place where it was allegedly shot down. But the main evidence against such a theory is the flight data obtained from the black box, which provided the exact data about the time, speed, direction, acceleration, and altitude of the plane at the moment of the explosion. The official stating that both black boxes were opened and analyzed in Amsterdam in the presence of experts from Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and the Dutch Aviation Office. Yet other news sources are adamant that the black boxes were never found. So which version do you believe? If you ask me, I believe the original version. There's no way after 50 years that they would have been able to keep the truth from coming out. There are just too many moving parts. But for the sake of argument, let's say the plane was shot down at 2,400 feet as some conspiracy theorists suggest. In general, terminal velocity is reached after about 12 seconds, which covers about 450 meters or 1,500 feet. So whether Vesna fell from 33,000 feet or 2,400 feet, the fact that she survived being blown up or shot down and fell to earth and lived is just as miraculous either way. But it's not important what I think. How about you? What do you think? I look forward to hearing your comments and theories. And as always, remember, leave the rubber on the runway and your troubles on the ground. And I will see you next time in the air. Yeah, I am Maximus.